Contrary to what the media tell you, Israel is politically stable. I'll have the details and a little bit of a discussion about what happens when you go to bed with woke anti-Semites coming up on In Focus. I think almost every morning, a story appears in the Israeli media about how the Americans are planning for the day after Netanyahu, or today there was a story about how Egypt, which is now hosting the leaders of Hamas who've come from their home in Qatar to Cairo to talk about a ceasefire and getting terrorists released from Israeli prisons and all kinds of things. The Egyptians are now thinking about how a ceasefire can foment the overthrow of the government, and then they'll get a new government in, or why the government of Israel will be overthrown so that they can get a new government in that's going to free more hostages than the current government is. And really there's this expectation that has been fed by the Israeli media that the Netanyahu government is about to fall and that Israel is about to go to new elections. And a lot of the push polls that we've been seeing showing that the Likud is at, 10 mandates, 15 mandates, and that Benny Gantz is passing Netanyahu by, 80 points or whatever in head-to-head polls, that this shows that Netanyahu is politically weakened. And then we hear Biden administration officials briefing media saying that the only reason that Netanyahu opposes a Palestinian state is because he's thinking about his own political interests, or the only reason why Israel won't make any deal with Hamas to get our hostages out, but actually we have conditions and red lines to negotiations, is all fueled by Netanyahu's political interests. Or he's being led by the nose by these crazed lunatic fanatics who are his coalition partners. The most, emblematic of that are the way that Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir have been demonized by the Israeli media and by the American media in particular. So I want to give you the results of a poll. It's the largest polling sample of any polling company that operates for the news media in Israel. It's the Direct Polls survey agency, and they published a poll with Israel's Channel 14 on February 13th that the rest of the media, which uses much smaller samples in their polls, is desperately trying to bury because they don't want to deal with it. And this has been the case with Direct Polls since it was established, I think, like 2 years ago. So just to give you some background, Direct Polls is the only polling company in Israel that accurately polled the results of the elections to the Knesset in November of 2022, and their track record of accuracy has since and previously been much higher than Israel's other polling companies that work with the more established and very far to the left other television channels and newspapers in Israel. So they have a good track record, and also their data are very different from the data that have been pushed out by other polling agencies since the beginning of the war and really over the past many years. So I just want to run you through these polling numbers because they're important. So first of all, I want to talk to you about what they showed in this February 13th poll about the sentiment of Israel and what it is that's motivating our politicians, what it is that's motivating the country in relation to the war, specifically in relation to the war with Gaza. So first of all, the big tactical question that Israel has facing, it's also a strategic question, is how do we deal with Rafah? How do we deal with the border town with Egypt in Gaza, the southernmost town in Gaza? This is where most of the Gazans from northern Gaza Strip and the central Gaza Strip have left to their homes to get to for refuge is Rafah. Most of them are hoping that Egypt will let them in so that they can either be in Egypt or go to third countries, but the Egyptians are blocking that, and the Americans, of course, are supporting Egypt blocking these people from leaving. So they're in Rafah right across the border from Egypt. There are over 1 million of them there. And the question is, what are we going to do about Rafah? And so the poll asks the public, does Israel need to expand the operation into Rafah, even at the expense of a confrontation with the United States and Egypt? The answer is pretty decisive. 73% of Israelis, this sample includes Israeli Jews and Arabs, 73% of Israelis say yes. Israel needs to expand the operation into Rafah, even at the price of a confrontation, a clash with the United States and with Egypt. 73% say yes. 23% of Israelis say no, we shouldn't risk a clash with the United States and Egypt in order to operate in Rafah, and 4% say that they don't know. And just to be clear, so it's a tactical question, what do we do? And it's also a strategic question because Hamas's remaining battalions from the rest of the Strip have fled to or were always located in Rafah. We already rescued 2 hostages in Rafah a week and a half ago, so we know that many of the hostages are likely located in Rafah, along with 1 million Gazans. And so, we want to locate and rescue the hostages. We want to annihilate the rest of Hamas's organized fighting battalions. I think they have 6 of them that are supposed to be located in Rafah. So there are military reasons that we have to go in, and also to seize the international border, because as long as Hamas has control of an international border with Egypt, it's going to continue to be able to rebuild its forces, to resupply, etc. So there are tactical issues here. I talked about some in my conversation with Minister Amichai Shikli, where there's some who say, no, we should, north of Rafah, we should just make a buffer zone that we control all of Gaza north of that strip. The Netzarim route is what it's called. And then we can go in there as needed and on the basis of precise intelligence and attack them and rescue hostages, etc., and let them just be there. 1 million of them, enjoy yourselves, and let Egypt deal with that. And then we slowly clean out the rest of Gaza to the north of Rafah. And that's one idea that has a lot of traction in Israel. And the other one is, no, we actually have to evacuate the people who are living in Rafah so that we can go in and have a major high-intensity operation in Rafah along the lines of what we did in Khan Yunis, what we did in Gaza City, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the deliberation that Israelis have now. The Americans have made clear, we absolutely don't want you to go into Rafah. Israel mustn't go into Rafah. I think 25 out of 26 members of the EU said that they opposed it. Thank God for Hungary. And so we're seeing, a major push in the Security Council. The Americans drafted a UN Security Council resolution that said that they opposed Israel going into Rafah. So there's this whole international pile-on to save Hamas, essentially, because the idea is that if Israel doesn't operate in Rafah, that it won't have a decisive victory over Hamas. You can fight to a draw, and then the Americans can get a Palestinian state. So that's Rafah. And then there's a question about the war in the north. So to be clear about the north, with Hezbollah in the north, there's been essentially no debate in Israel about whether we should carry out a war in Lebanon. Just go ahead and, the minute we now have freed up our reservists, give them a respite, get them reorganized with their jobs, with their families, et cetera, and then move them up to the north, the 300,000 reservists who were operating in Gaza, and they were mustered out over the past few weeks, and then send them in the springtime to the north and get rid of Hezbollah there to enable the Israelis to move back. We have 80,000, I think, Israelis in the border towns in the north who simply cannot go home so long as the threat of Hezbollah remains. So we haven't had that conversation because everybody's been scope locked on Gaza, which is why these numbers are pretty remarkable, because the one thing that everybody's afraid of is that Hamas is much less powerful than Hezbollah is. And what they have waiting for us in the north is much worse than what we experienced in Gaza. So people are worried and leery about going into the north. It'll be much more difficult, but now at least our men are combat hardened. They know how to fight. They know what to expect under fire. And so we're in a better position to deal with Hezbollah in the north. But it's a much bigger threat. And the Americans are coming in saying, just surrender territory in Rosh Nikra and in the Golan Heights, lots of it, to Hezbollah. That'll feed the beasts, then you'll get another 3 months until they invade the Upper Galilee, and we're going to give you security guarantees that are going to be written on water, and you can trust them as much as you could trust, as the South Vietnamese could trust the American mutual defense treaty that they had there too with Washington. So that would be great. And we haven't had a discussion really. We just have had news reports about Biden's guy, Amos Hochstein. He's this point man for giving up Israeli territory to Hezbollah. So he's been trying to mediate that right now. And so we get news reports about it. We get a lot less analysis, and we haven't had almost any sort of debate about it. So here's the question. How should Israel remove the threat of Hezbollah in the north? Everybody understands we have to remove the threat. How do we do it? So that's the question, and they're given two options. With war at the appropriate time and with a diplomatic deal, Hochstein's deal, which involves Israel surrendering its sovereign territory to Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. So here it is. 54% of Israelis say that we need to go to war in Lebanon at the appropriate time, and 44% say with a diplomatic deal. 2% say they don't know. So that's a 10-point split in favor of war, which everybody in Israel understands is going to be a terribly difficult war. They've been saying now that Israel is ordering 35,000 generators so that people who are on respirators won't die when we go to war with Hezbollah, because we assess that their missile threat to Israel poses a threat to knock off Israel's electricity grid for several days and up to 2 weeks in parts of the country. So Israel is now speed ordering 35,000 generators so that they can get the generators to people who are on who need oxygen, and so that's notable. 54 to 44 is significant, given the threat. And then we have issues of a hostage deal, which are important. So the first question overall is, must Israel agree to a hostage deal with Hamas on Hamas's terms? So at all costs. Should Israel agree to a hostage deal that will get our hostages released, whatever the terms? And this is what you're getting. Some of the campaigners for the hostages are saying that we should just open up Israel's prisons, let all the terrorists out in order to get our hostages back. So on that question, 76% of Israelis say no. 20% of Israelis say yes, and 4% of Israelis have no opinion, okay? Then we have, what would Israel's red lines for a hostage deal be? So these are possible red lines that direct polls asked the surveyed group their view of. So the first red line they put out is no to an end of the fighting, to a permanent ceasefire. That's what the Americans are pushing for, right? Biden said last week, was it last week, I think, when he was meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan, he was talking about a 6-week ceasefire during the course of the hostages for terrorist swap. And then he and others have also said that what they hope is that the ceasefire that will take effect during the hostages for terrorist swap will become permanent. And so now they're trying to get Israel not to fight during Ramadan. Never mind that Arab jihadists always increase their attacks during Ramadan, but somehow or another, we're supposed to respect their holy month, when the way that they celebrate their holy months is by expanding their terrorist operations against Israelis. But be that as it may, and then add to the fact that, of course, they respect Israel's holy days so much that they invaded us and had a one-day slaughter on Simchat Torah. But be that as it may, everybody cares about Ramadan. Everybody's supposed to care about Ramadan. They want a ceasefire during Ramadan. That's not going to happen. But they're hoping that the ceasefire for and terrorists for hostages deal that they're trying to organize in Cairo with Hamas terrorists is going to lead to a permanent ceasefire, and 84% of Israelis agree that this cannot happen. So 84% of Israelis say that their red line for the hostage deal is that it can't be, or that they agree that a red line for a hostage deal has to be the issue of a permanent ceasefire, that we have to restart the fight no matter what. So that's 84% of Israelis say that's what has to happen. 13% are willing to go for a permanent ceasefire in exchange for the hostages. 84% disagree. 3% of Israelis have no opinion. And then another one that Hamas demands is that the IDF withdraw from Gaza in exchange for the hostages. So here you have 81% of Israelis oppose that Hamas condition. They say absolutely not. No IDF withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for the hostages. 15% would be willing to withdraw from Gaza in exchange for the hostages. 4% have no opinion. So 81% say that there can be no Israeli IDF withdrawal from Gaza. And then there's a question of who are the terrorists that would be released from prison in exchange for the hostages. And Hamas, of course, wants all of the murderers released because those are their highest valued terrorists, are the ones that they like the best, the ones who have killed the most Jews, who are serving life in prison sentences for killing one or more Jews. And so 67% of Israelis say they refuse to release murderers for the hostages. So no release of terrorist murderers. 25% oppose that as a red line. They think it's okay to release murderers in exchange for the hostages. So you have a quarter support letting terrorists out of prison in exchange for the hostages. 2/3 of Israelis oppose it, and 8% of Israelis have no opinion. And then there's the issue of Hamas returning to power. So that goes into Rafiah also, but because if Hamas remains in charge in Rafiah, if it isn't dislodged in Rafiah, in Rafah, then it will be able to come back to power because it's already in power in the one area that the Palestinians control. And anyway, or they could form a unity government with a Palestinian Authority, which the Palestinian Authority has already agreed to. And Vladimir Putin is holding a terrorist conference, Palestinian terrorism conference on February 26th. It's like a whatever. So all of the major and minor Palestinian terrorist groups, most of which were actually formed by the KGB in the 1960s. So the PLO, the PFLP, the DFLP, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, which were not formed by the Soviets, but whatever. So they're all supposed to come for a big powwow with Putin in Moscow next week on February 26th. So 92% of Israelis say that Hamas may not return to power in Gaza. 6% disagree, and 2% have no opinion. Okay, so that's that. And now let's move to politics. So the first question, even though we have indirect elections of prime minister because you will elect a slate of candidates from the party of your choice, or the party selects the list, whatever, you vote for a party, and then the head of the party that has the most chance of forming a 61-plus coalition government out of it, the Knesset's 120 seats, he becomes a prime minister. So it's usually the head of the largest party. Sometimes it can be the second largest party, whatever. It's the head of the right wing, the right religious bloc, or the left bloc, whoever it is. So you always know who you're voting for prime minister if you're voting for a party that will align with the largest bloc party in their bloc, and then the head of the major party is going to be the prime minister. So that's how things work in Israel. A little bit convoluted for people who don't live in parliamentary systems. Anyway, so suitability to serve as prime minister, direct polls check Netanyahu against Benny Gantz on the one hand, who's been leading in the polls, and with Yair Lapid, who is the head of the largest opposition party, Yesh Atid, and he is the head of the opposition. So first, Prime Minister Netanyahu against Minister Benny Gantz. It's 47% of Israelis think that Netanyahu is more suited to be the prime minister, and 34% of Israelis think that Gantz is more suited to be prime minister. Netanyahu, head-to-head match against Yair Lapid. Netanyahu gets 49% of the vote, and 49% of Israelis in the survey said that they prefer Netanyahu, and Lapid got 28% of Israelis surveyed said that they prefer Netanyahu. So Netanyahu has made up whatever he lost, and he is now leading Gantz by 13 points, and he's leading Yair Lapid by 21 points. Sorry. So he's way ahead of his possible opponents on the right. And then there's a question about, well, what should we do politically? Because, you have the Americans saying, let's, maybe we'll look past Netanyahu, maybe we'll have elections, maybe you'll have some way Netanyahu will be ousted and replaced by somebody else. We'll get to that in a second. And the Egyptians are saying there'll be elections, he'll be ousted. So here, what do Israelis want? What is your preferred political option? So they're given 5 different options. So the first option is continue with the present government. The second one is the current government with Yair Lapid's party inside, along with Benny Gantz's party and Avigdor Lieberman's party inside, Yisrael Beitenu, so it's Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid, and Yisrael Beitenu, Lieberman. And Lieberman's considered like this strong guy, this like tough guy who's, really tough, and he won't make bad deals and stuff like that. That's his persona in the media. And Lapid, of course, is the head of the left-wing bloc. So that's a second one. The current government, Netanyahu in charge, with Lapid and Lieberman coming in. The third option they got was just Lieberman joining the government in the war cabinet. And then the fourth option is elections now. And the fifth option is dismantling the government and forming a new coalition. So what's your preferred political option? Continue with the present government, keep the present government and add Lapid's party and Lieberman's party to it. And the third one is just bring in Lieberman. And then the next option, the fourth option, is elections now. And the fifth option is dismantling the government and forming a new coalition inside the existing Knesset. And to do that, you need essentially 5 members of the 64-seat coalition, deserting the coalition, joining the opposition, voting in a no confidence vote against the coalition, and then the members of Knesset who just voted no confidence in the government, saying that Netanyahu should be replaced as prime minister, replaced by Benny Gantz or whomever, and then Benny Gantz forming a coalition that he would have 61 seats for. So that kind of 64-seat government would include the defectors from the current coalition and then all the left-wing parties and both Arab parties. So that would be the other option. So I think these are important data because what they show is that all in all, Israelis are completely behind the government's strategy for fighting this war, taking over Rafiah, not cowering in the corner and bowing to all of Hamas's demands, but rather they have red lines. They don't want a deal at all costs. They want the hostages back, but they want to win the war. And they're unified in that. If you add to that the data point that Minister Amichai Shikli mentioned in our podcast earlier this week, and that I've discussed as well, you find that 92% of Israeli Jews and 85% of Israelis overall oppose Palestinian state. And so what you have is a very clear picture of a very large majority of Israelis united around the need for victory in this war, absolute victory in this war, including, again, notably, 54% of Israelis who also want to expand the war to a second front, a much more difficult front in the north with Hezbollah. Even though we haven't even started it yet, even though we haven't committed to it in a major way, you have 54% of Israelis who say we also have to take the war to the north. So these are numbers that you don't see reported almost at all in the Israeli media. You don't see them reported in the American media at all. And you have all of these policymakers who are operating under a false conception that Israel is politically unstable, that Netanyahu has lost his mandate to lead, at least from the perspective of public opinion, that the public has soured on him and would like Benny Gantz to be the prime minister or Yair Lapid to be the prime minister. And we see that these claims are simply not borne out by the data. And again, the direct polls data, what it has the advantage over the others is not only that the agency itself has an excellent track record in accuracy, but more importantly, their sample is much larger than the sample that was used by the other polling firms. So we're talking about a very, very important poll that shows that the assumptions that the American view, that the Egyptian view, that the European view, that they can just oust the prime minister and we'll have elections, or the Knesset will just organize to oust the right and bring in the left because that's the will of the people or because they can. The answer is no, because if you had 5 defectors from the coalition that joined with the left, whether it would be dissatisfied members of Knesset from Likud or the Shas party, where Aryeh Deri, the leader, is said to be moving very, very far to the left now for whatever reasons, they would not have a political future. The defectors from Likud would never be reelected. Nobody would need them on the left, and on the right they would be thrown out, just like Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked were, who tried to defect to the left in the past. So they don't have a political future. The political future for all these people is on the right, and if Shas were to do something like that, then Shas would disappear as a political force in Israel, because the voters are united behind winning the war and political stability. So this is a very, very important snapshot. And here I just want to, I think here it's also important to think about what the implications of this sort of effort on the part of Western governments and others to try to subvert the will of the Israeli people or get involved with things. It's like, why would they think what they say? And I think what they think, before I get to what it would do if they actually got their way and the government were to fall, you have to ask, why is it that they think that the political situation is very different from the one that we actually have here? I did forget to give you the mandates and how many votes all the parties would get. And there are just, I should probably tell you the last one because that's actually important, which is that the direct polls data showed that Likud is actually leading Gatz's party. I never use the name of it. It's because it doesn't make any sense in English. It's the stateliness party. Machaneh Mamlachti. It's basically the party of the permanent bureaucracy. That's what it means in Hebrew, more or less. And the generals and, everybody that we were fighting before the war. So Likud gets 28 seats, Gantz gets 26, Lapid gets 12, Shas gets 9, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the guy who everybody loves to hate. So he and Bezalel Smotrich ran together in November 2022, and they together got 10, and it was like a question whether Ben-Gvir was worth 6 maybe, and Smotrich was worth 4, whatever. So Ben-Gvir today is worth 9 because the public has moved to the right. Lieberman, who is sort of the untested guy, he's the guy sitting in the background because he's not in the government, and he's just, he's just heckling on the sidelines saying, go right, go right. So he's polling at 9. I think he's at 7 now. Yehudut Torah, the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party, is at 8. Ram, the Muslim Brother Party, has 6. Smotrich's party has 5, so that together Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have gone up 4 seats. Meretz, which didn't get in very far to the right, far to the left, they got 4. The Labor Party, which has 4 now in the current Knesset, has not gone in, has not passed the threshold in any poll forever, not just this poll, but any of them, and so they're gone. And Hadash, the Arab nationalist party, has 4. So the right religious has 59 mandates, the left has 51, and the Arabs have 10. So that would be the possible left Arabs coalition. It's a very terrorist-supporting, very radical, far-left, post-Zionist coalition if the left were to form a government with the Arabs, and that would also require Lieberman to go in with the Arabs. So that, anyway, so they're at 51 to 10, the left Arabs, and the right religious, not including Lieberman, is at 59. So that's the state of the thing. And then the question that I started asking, and then I saw I didn't give you that point, is why would Biden, given these numbers, be under the perception that the government is about to fall? And the reason that Biden has this perception, and the reason that Europeans have the perception, is because the only Israelis that they're willing to talk to are the ones that are feeding this perception. So we saw over the past week, I actually broke it in the media here, that Ehud Barak did a space on Twitter with these people from the big anti-government demonstrations. So Ehud Barak the former prime minister, the former chief of staff of the army, and the partner with the Democrats in all things related to overthrowing Netanyahu. He was the one who sort of organized the whole anti-government chaos in the 10 months preceding the October 7th invasion. And I've spoken about him a lot on this podcast, mainly before the war, because of his prominent role in subverting Israeli politics and calling for a civil war in Israel and inciting one, and calling for blood to be shed in civil violence against the government, etc. And he funded a lot of this stuff too, because he's become a multimillionaire with all kinds of shady deals. Anyway, so Ehud Barak was on this Twitter space that was taped, and what he said in that podcast or that Twitter discussion was that we need elections in Israel by June. Yes, we have to have elections, which means that the government has to fall this month in February, so that because we have like 90 or 100 days between vote of no confidence in the government and election. So he said Israel absolutely needs to get to elections by June, because it has to happen. A new government has to be formed earlier enough before the U.S. presidential elections in November in order for Biden to take advantage of having a left-wing government. So the polls show that if there were elections, it's not at all clear that the left would win. In fact, the smart money seems to be back on Netanyahu and the right. But be that as it may, the assumption that we're all falling apart, that the people of Israel hate Netanyahu, they hate the government, they want elections, they want everything new, and they want to lose the war because they want an immediate ceasefire, they want the hostages back at all costs. That's what the media is putting out, not at all reflected in public sentiment. So Ehud Barak has the ear of the embassy, the U.S. embassy, and of the State Department, and of senior intelligence officials in the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. And so he's talking to them, and he's saying we have to overturn the government by January. Now, why does he want that we need elections by June, so we need to overthrow the government this month? Why does he want it? Because he explained in this podcast or in this Twitter space that that's the amount of time you need in order for the Biden administration to force Israel to accept a Palestinian state. So this is all for the Palestinian state that 92% of Israeli Jews, 85% of Israelis overall, completely oppose the establishment of. So that's what we need. And then there's this guy named Ami Dror, who is like an ad guy, like a PR executive in Israel, and he's one of the key leaders as well of the whole anti-government insurrection that took place before October 7th. And he gave a podcast or a Zoom discussion with his American counterparts who have been doing all the political violence against Israeli leaders when they were visiting the United States in the 10 months preceding the October 7th invasion. So he wants them to start harassing Israeli politicians from the coalition when they come to America. This actually already happened with one Israeli Knesset member, I think 2 weeks ago, who was visiting in New York, and he was heckled by these insurrectionists from the left who either are Israelis who live in New York or they're American Jews who hate Israel or something. But it was all instigated by people like Ami Dror here. And so he said, no, we don't want elections. We want to overthrow the government by getting 5 members of the coalition to defect and join the opposition and have a no confidence vote and then form a government with Benny Gantz as the head of it. So all of these people have the ear of foreigners, of foreign governments. They work with foreign governments because they see that there's no domestic support for Palestinian statehood, so they work with foreign governments with the idea that the Biden administration will coerce Israel into accepting a Palestinian state for them because Israelis don't like them, but Israelis are afraid of Washington and therefore will do whatever Biden tells us to do, even though 92% of Israeli Jews and 85% of Israeli Jews and Arabs oppose a Palestinian state. So they're trying to use external coercion to force their way politically on an unwilling public. And here I think it's very important to point out that, when you get into this kind of political subversion and you use sort of the permanent state in a country, the legal fraternity, the retired generals, and maybe even the sitting generals to try to force on an unwilling public and unwilling public representatives, elected officials, the will of a small but very powerful minority in the country, what you get is a breakdown of democracy. and you know, maybe a lot of people outside of Israel want that, but the people of Israel certainly don't want that. And you're seeing it in America too, you know, where you're seeing a lot of people on the right who feel very disaffected because they feel like, you know, their vote doesn't matter. They vote for Trump, and then they get the Russiagate, which was all a lie, and that paralyzed him in his presidency for 2 years. You get all of this mail-in votes in 2020 that are unreliable, and vote harvesting, et cetera. And so people don't trust the election results. And then you get paranoid people. You get people who start engaging in conspiracy theories or thinking that democracy is terrible because it doesn't work. And then, you know, you get like Tucker Carlson going to Moscow and, you know, praising Putin and the Russian miracle and stuff. And because people lose faith in democracy, and if Western democracy doesn't work, well, then you go to the bad guy, which is Putin, and he must be doing something right because the trains run on time in Moscow. And I think, you know, and I saw this really interesting discussion, maybe we'll just cut to it here for a second, with Konstantin Kisin, who I think his family came from Russia. He's from the trigonometry webcast, podcast, and he was talking about, you know, what is the woke right? And I just want to do a clip real quick here from him.
I do think what we're seeing is the wokeification of the right. If you think about what woke is, right, it's a kind of resentment-based blindness to reality, which says our society is terrible and everything about it is terrible and we must constantly be punished for the sins of our ancestors. And therefore, this is terrible, everything else is better, right? The wokeification of the right operates in a slightly different way, where it's not about our society, it's about the elites. The elites of Western societies have destroyed the true West, have infiltrated it with trans, LGBTQ, open border immigration, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, it's not working. And by the way, you can't vote your way out of it, because when you vote for Brexit, what do? Well, they try and overturn it. Eventually, they sort of half-ass it. Never really happens. And the same with Trump.
Yeah.
So what he's saying here is that, just like I said, if democracy doesn't get reflected in policy, if the democratically expressed will of the people at elections is not then translated into government policy in America, you know, about the border and Britain with the Brexit or whatever, then people start becoming more conspiratorial and more adulatory towards other things. So that, you know, in Israel, we had that in the 90s, and we got the sociopath Yigal Amir, who decided that the best thing to do would be just assassinate Prime Minister Rabin. And, you know, that had a tremendous impact, horrible impact on Israel for 20, 30 years after that. And we're really just coming out of it. But it's not just political violence that you get. You also end up getting leaders who are even more radical, like, because, all right, you didn't like that guy, we got Trump, and now we're going to get, you know, somebody even worse, because people just get pushed over the edge and they don't believe in, you know, the establishment anymore. They think it's crooked or corrupt or whatever, and they'll just go to more and more radical voices, and then you have societies falling apart. And so the point of democracy is that it's a deliberative process and persuasion, and people have to think, and they're participating in the public life of their country. And when they're shut out because you're ignoring them and you're trying to subvert their decisions and force upon them policies that they completely object to, you end up with a recipe for political violence, rancor, fascism, and other forms of radicalism that are terrible for any society, and particularly for democratic societies, for our societies. And I know we don't really have time, but I just want to show you this little tiny clip. It's long, but I'm just going to show you a bit of it, of Bernie Sanders and this anti-Semitic, you know, woke reporter the other day that I saw on Twitter, which just tickled me pink. So watch this for a second.
In your view, is what Israel is doing in Gaza a genocide?
In my view, it is absolutely disgraceful, horrible, and I'm doing, as a United States Senator, everything I can to end it. And where I'm sitting is, and I don't know how many people know this, Every year, the United States provides about $3.5 billion in military aid to Israel. On top of that, there is a bill. I was supposed to be here earlier. Couldn't come because a bill came up for not just all for Israel, $95 billion, including $14 billion for Israel. And I have led the opposition to that. I do not want to see the United States complicit in what Netanyahu and his right-wing lunatic friends are doing right now to the Palestinian people. So my job right now is to support what the United Nations is trying to do, have a humanitarian ceasefire, see if we can get the humanitarian aid immediately in there, and work out, as complex and difficult as it is, some type of long-term solution to what's going on there.
But do you buy the South African case at the International Court of Justice that what Israel is doing in Gaza constitutes genocide or genocidal acts?
I think, look, we can argue about definitions. It is horrible. Right now, 29,000 people have been killed, and some 70,000 have been injured. Some 65% of the housing units have been destroyed or damaged. And I am worried right now, and I almost wonder why I'm in the UK and not back in the US dealing with this stuff, is that we have hundreds of thousands of children are facing starvation. That's what I have to work on right now.
But if one agrees that it is a genocide, it means that other states have a legal right and duty to prevent genocidal acts being carried out.
But see, we can talk about that. But what does that mean in real terms? Right now, what I am trying to do is what I think is probably maybe, and I can do it because I'm a senator, you can't. Right now, maybe, if we tell Mr. Netanyahu that he's not getting a check for $10 billion more to continue his aggressive action, he and his right-wing friends may decide it is not a good idea to continue to do that. So that's where I am coming from.
So what did we have in this clip? We have this reporter who's saying, is Israel guilty of genocide? And he doesn't want to answer the question. So he goes on about, well, look, I'm great. I don't want to give Israel military aid, and I don't want Israel to have free reign, and they mustn't go into Rafah, and I'm all anti-Israel. Look, I'm totally anti-Israel. See how anti-Israel? Yes, but they're committing genocide. What do you think of that? And he tries to evade it again. He's, well, now what was that? It's it's the exact personification of the old expression, if you go to sleep with dogs, you wake up with fleas. Now, here, Bernie Sanders made his bed with the woke left. As a Jew, with a Brooklyn accent, right? He sounds like everybody's grandfather from Brooklyn, right? So here he is, Mr. Brooklyn Jew from Vermont. He's a communist. He does not like Israel. He is a non-Zionist Jew, but Israel isn't committing genocide. So he's trying to square the circle by saying, see how anti-Israel I am? And then she's saying to him, yeah, but shouldn't British and American citizens be barred? I don't know if we're going to show you this, but she asked him from serving in the IDF, and he's like, I don't know. No, I wouldn't serve there now, because he knows that it's all a load of crap. He knows it's not true. Israel's not committing genocide. There's nothing wrong with Americans or British or anybody serving in the IDF, because it's the most moral military on earth, and it's fighting the good fight, and it's on the side of, of sunshine and light and freedom and democracy and all the rest of it. And our enemies are the enemies of humanity, of civilization. And so therefore it's good for Israel to win. And he knows all these things, but he can't say any of these things because he's in bed with Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Students for Justice in Palestine, and all the rest of these anti-Semitic organizations. So he's stuck. And I think there's a lesson here. There is a lesson here. The lesson is, you can't justify the annihilation of the Jews. You can't say that the Jews don't have the same rights as everybody else to self-defense, to national self-determination, etc., and think you're going to get away halfway, because you're not, because your side has already gone off the edge. Your side is already celebrating October 7th. So, in Israel, again, it's important, that data point, that 92% of Israeli Jews oppose Palestinian statehood, is an important data point. It's important because it says okay, we get it. The Palestinians are the least deserving people in the entire world when it comes to national sovereignty. Because look, they have had a sovereign state in Gaza since 2005 when Israel left completely and just gave it to them with a ribbon wrapped around it. And they turned it into a state, a quasi-mini state, albeit, but a state that was organized around the single principle of genocide. I saw this little clip from the Israeli media of this Arab affairs reporter who's an Arab, and he's very affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. And I don't know why he's on Israeli television, whatever. He does like the psychological warfare bit, and he gets well paid for it on Channel 12 here. So he was trying to say that the Palestinians were really moderate. How does he say this? Because according to this poll that was put out by Khalil Shkaki in September, it said that only 44% of Palestinians in Gaza supported Hamas, or only 44% of Palestinians supported Hamas, sorry. So in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. And so then the political affairs correspondent said to him, yeah, but that number doubled after October 7th, so that when they were just sort of going along to get along and they weren't fighting the Jews, they had 44% because they weren't getting the electricity right or the potholes cleaned or whatever. But the minute that they carried out a one-day genocide, when they killed babies and women and raped women and boys and men and girls and everything else and took hostages and killed 1,200 people. So then they doubled their support, right? So Israelis look at that and say, holy smokes, of course we can't give these people sovereignty. Obviously, this is an existential threat to the Jewish people because these people themselves are the problem. It's not Hamas, right? It's a people that is motivated by genocide. Like that's what does it for them. So no, we don't want them to have a state. Right? But the American Jews are kind of like, well, we love Palestinians. We're pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel. Well, look what happened to Bernie Sanders. He's being grilled, right, by this Nazi lady, right, who's saying, well, if Israel's committing genocide, then how can you support them at all? But Israel isn't committing genocide. But he can't say that because if he says that, then he can't be a member of the squad anymore. He can't be friends with Rashida anymore, right? So he's stuck. But he made his bet. He's gone. Like he's done. I don't know if he's going to run for re-election or not. He's over 80, whatever. Uncle Bernie's done. But what about the American Jewish community? If you support this, then you end up supporting October 7th because it's not even a slippery slope anymore. The people who support Palestinian statehood on the campuses, in public life in the United States, if you ask them, well, was October 7th justified? Then, you'll get an answer like the president of Harvard. Well, it depends on the context, right? Genocide is contextualized. So the answer to all of that is to act like the Israeli people. Say, no compromise, no context, total victory. That's what we need. That's what we're organized around here. That's what we're unified around here. That's why we're politically stable. And that's why it's very difficult to subvert us politically, even if you talk to the likes of Ehud Barak and his friends all day, every day. They're never going to get you anywhere because the Israeli people aren't with them. The Israeli people are with victory and with anybody who they believe is going to lead us there. So that's my thought. I think it's really important to bear these in mind. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.